You basically did it as you promised. Exactly. We have right now 100% financed with the desired interest rate. I think it was really well structured. I didn't feel hidden stuff.
In today's YouTube video, we're going to check out an in-depth case of one of my clients who bought a 3-room co-living property in proximity to the Oktoberfest. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the numbers as transparent as you have ever seen it, giving you the black and white in a market that is plagued by intransparency and lies. So let's dive into the numbers right away. What we see right here is the property before renovation, an existing property built in the 70s that definitely needs a lot of modernization. What we did to the property is we transformed it into a co-living property, increasing its rental yield and boosting its tax benefit by utilizing paragraph 6 ESTG. As you see, we split the property and rented out 3 individual rooms instead of renting it out standard to 1 family. The renovation took us about 1 to 2 months to complete, and you're going to see how we uplifted the quality of the property utilizing smart renovations from the electricity all the way up to the piping, securing future safety for our investors and delivering real numbers. Right here, we have around 74 square meters of a property in Munich that we transformed and increased its rental yield from a mere 2% to around 5%, collecting a cold rent of 2,475 euros, splitting it into 3 tenants. Now, what we did to this property is we renovated it for 51,000 euros, which ultimately resulted in a large tax benefit for our investor. And how this process went about is very simple. We spotted an existing property in a great location because obviously we can't change a location, but we can change the renovation standard of said property. What we did is we split the top room, as seen on the left, with 29 square meters into 2 rooms consisting of 14 square meters with a balcony access. Now this enables us to collect a higher rent as depicted here, and increasing rent from 1,120 euros to 2,475 euros. Now what we need to understand before we dive into the numbers in depth is what legal documents surround that property. First of all, we're going to look into the purchase contract, which further shows what numbers we're working with here. We have a 600,000 euro property as communicated, and obviously we have to supply certain inventory to also be able to rent it out as co-living. So if you take a closer look here, you see that we provide 3 double beds, 3 closets, 3 desks, and complementary chairs. Obviously we need a bit of balcony equipment too, and a fitted kitchen, which, including all its appliances, is one of the biggest value boosters to your renovated property, consisting of every amenity that your or our tenant is going to need to have an effective and clean living in co-living. What you're looking at is one of the most crucial parts of our service, in which we're able to guarantee the rent to our client, for him to have no risk of financial jeopardy. What you also see under paragraph 2 is that we guarantee a certain timeline in which we must be able to finish the renovation in order for our client to plan accurately and obviously have some dependence on said tax benefit. The most important part for you as somebody considering this investment is going to be to look into the purchase price split. As communicated, we have a purchase price of around 600,000 euros. But if you look into it closer, you're going to see that 52,560 euros are dedicated to turn the property as seen before from an existing old property in dire need of renovation to a rental machine, increasing its rental yield to around 5% in Munich, where we have an average rental yield of around 2.5%, increasing it by almost 100%. Now, let's get into set numbers. But in order to understand the purchase contract and our strategy surrounding said purchase contract, we need to take a look at the mortgage document. Now, what we call a so-called financing offer is ultimately the mortgage which our client signed to finance said property. What we see here is the so-called annuity, which ultimately results in the payment for our client. By the way, annuity comes from the Latin word annum, which implies your yearly cost to the bank. consisting of two parameters. Obviously, your interest rate, little tip, you only pay the Sollzins, and obviously your repayment rate, which in this case is around 1%, building up an annuity of a total of 5%, coming back to the point of our rental yield being around 5% too, meaning that we have built a very cash flow effective property here. Now, what really matters when you look into this financing offer is obviously how much money my client had to invest for a property of this scale. 600,000, it seems like a lot. 52,000 for a renovation. How is he going to be able to pay said property? Well, that is why I recommend to work with the LDP group, because what you see is how effective we structured the down payment in order for my client to invest a mere 5.5%. Now, these 5.5% consist of the notary fee and our land register tax, which ultimately results in a down payment of 33,000 euros. Now, the real interesting kicker here is that the 600,000 going back to the purchase contract already include our renovation of 52,000 euros, which compared to a very conservative real estate investment already halves the whole equity put in, still resulting in a higher rental yield, still resulting in a high tax benefit. And what we're going to do now is ultimately crunch the numbers to see how said investment resulted and played out for my investor Nick here. We're going to jump into our dedicated software, which we use in order to communicate numbers effectively. Now, the kicker is what ultimately matters the most for a property is going to be the location. So if we look into the location of the property and we turn on the satellite view, we see that the Oktoberfest, yes, that Oktoberfest is in proximity to our property, ultimately securing in a very, very, very attractive rental location for our property. Now, obviously, we have to consider property from the outside. You see that we're looking at a very, very regular existing property that we basically turned around from the inside. Now, what we look at here is a 73 square meter property, which we ultimately transformed into generating 2,475 euros. And yes, we're going to look at the rental contracts in just a bit. Now, obviously, we have a certain maintenance charge, also labeled as Hausgeld, which is going to be paid by our investor or now landlord for certain charges that can't be passed on to tenants, also called umlagefähige Hausgeld. Now, what you also see is that we include certain Verwaltungskosten or labeled management costs, which ultimately is due to us providing the service of keeping your property rented out. And I state again, after you purchase a property from us, the real work starts. We keep on renting out your property, we keep on maintaining your property, and we're also going to find new tenants for you, resulting in a long-lasting partnership of you as an investor and the LDP group. Now, what do people talk about the most? Are you buying at a good price? What about the square meter price of your property? And I already hear people saying 600,000 for a 73 square meter property. But how about we use independent third-party tools to review the square meter price of said property, because they talk the best. All right, what we're going to open up here is the so-called Home Day Preisatlas, and is going to spit out an average square meter price of said property. Now, what we see is that the average square meter price of a property in set location is going to result in a square meter price, or is priced at a square meter of 8,400 euros. Now, what you see is that we're well below that 8,400 with a flat square meter of around 8,000. Now, I'm very confident in my service, and I sometimes even say that it's very hard to review a property that generates you 100% more in rental income, that delivers a tax benefit with a minimum down payment of 5.5% and still using conservative measures like Home Day Preisatlas. But I can tell you, if including all these extra services that we're going to provide, and yes, we're going to look into the purchase contract because I have some more news for you. And if we still match that square meter price, you're looking at a wonderful and sustainable investment that definitely secures a lot of value growth. Now, if we print out said calculation and look at what my investor ultimately kind of reflects on a daily basis after acquiring said property, you're not going to believe your eyes. As we talked about, our investor puts around 33,000 euros as a down payment. What we do in order to not manipulate value growth is we split our furniture from our purchase price. Because if I let the value, an average of 2%, let's say increase on your total price, that wouldn't be accurate. I'm not trying to manipulate you here. I'm trying to deliver a smart investment, which means that we distinct or separate our furniture from the purchase price, but obviously only on calculation basis. Now, if we look into the property, we see that right now we're in February, so we're generating around 11 months of a cold rent of 2,475 euros. And I'd like to remind you again that we have a rental guarantee for said rental income. Now, that ultimately results in a rental income on an annual basis of 27,225 euros. Now, coming back to our house guide, our landlord is faced by around 880 or 960 euros on an annual basis and management costs of around 1,440 euros due to us managing and re-renting your apartment. Which means from our income of 27,000, we're now left with 25,000 in financing costs. Which means with our rental income of 27,000, we're now left with around 25,000 of effective capital we can employ. Now, what you see here is that obviously our annuity, as kind of mentioned before, is reflected in our Finanzierung, in our financing cash flow, which results in an annual payment of around 30,600 euros, which if you divide it by 12, and by the way, I recommend to always do that, ultimately results in a monthly rate of around 2,550 euros. That means after the whole income, form of our rental yield or rent, which we increased with co-living, and our annuity, our management costs, and our so-called house guide, or let's say maintenance charges, we're left with a coverage of around 3,000 euros that we have to pay out of pocket. Now, if you divide these 3,000 euros, you're going to see that our investor only has to invest 250 euros for a property in Munich. All possible due to smart co-living concepts. Now, you're not here to just generate cash flow. You're here to optimize your salary as an expat coming to Germany being hit with a huge tax burden. So what we ultimately do is jump into a so-called tax perspective. Now, due to mathematic reasons and us deducting our so-called repayment, we obviously have to add it again, simply because your repayment is not tax deductible, it being a payment to the actual lowering of your debt. Which means that after deducting our depreciation in accordance to paragraph 7 ESTG, after deducting our furniture, which we also separated in the beginning, and after deducting our renovation in accordance to paragraph 6 ESTG, we're left with a negative economic output of 57,000 euros. And I love the Germans for one phrase in which they say, wir rechnen uns arm. We calculate ourselves poor. We use every expense related to your property and we lower your disposable income by 57,000 euros, resulting in a tax benefit of 23,000 euros in the first year of you investing into said property. Which means even if you have a minor negative cash flow, as some people like to call it, you're left with a positive return of over 20,000 euros after covering all costs from management to the insurance, and you being left with a large tax benefit that you desperately needed coming to Germany. Now, going back to my point of why it's important to shoot said property at a very good square meter, obviously this is our guarantee to secure a lot of value increase. Now, as we kind of spoke about before, we see that we did purchase this property at a very amazing square meter price. And I have to remind you again that this square meter price includes a renovation of over 52,000 euros, which obviously is not reflected in very conservative measurement tools. Now, what we see here is that we usually anticipate a very mediocre growth of 2% on an annual basis. Now, you please do your research on how much Munich as a city actually grew by in purchase price values over the last 10 years. Now, if we take that 2% assumption, we're going to, let's say, come to the point that our property is going to be sold in 10 years from now for 715,000 euros, and us being able to repay said debt at a low rate of 1%, resulting in a difference of residual debt and our purchase price value, which ultimately reflects a tax-free profit, yes, tax-free, of almost 200,000 euros, utilizing smart concepts. And before I let you guys go, I want you to take a look at all 3 rental contracts, which ultimately is the real-life proof, black and white, that we do generate these rents on a very easy basis. And before you look into that, you don't need any guarantees, you need statistics. Our vacancy rate in Munich is below 0.1%. Yes, you heard that right. 0.1% of residential properties in Munich are currently empty. So you are going to find a lot of attractive tenant clientele. Now, what obviously our concept entails is that we have 3 separate rental contracts containing a rental income of around 800 euros. The first room being rented out for 795. And for the real nerds, yes, you do get a Warmieten payment of around 75 euros, which ultimately is going to be reflected in extra liquidity for you to be able to pay your umlagefähige Kosten or your Betriebsabrechnung at the end of the year. As we look into Zimmer 2, which we're also going to compare the layout in a second, we see that the second room is rented out for 850 euros. And once we look into our third rental contract, we finally come to the conclusion that our property is rented out for a total cold rent of 2,475 euros. And the real kicker is that we don't take tenants below 12 months of minimum stay. And to ultimately end the circle here, we're going to look at the layout of said property, which we have rented out, which, as you can see, very easily is the same property we just looked at in our software. So let me recapitulate. We transformed an existing property into a co-living rental machine, buying it at a fair value price, increasing the rental yield of the property, delivering a huge tax benefit, all with a minimum down payment of only 5.5%. This is the future of real estate investments in Germany. And what you need to do is look at your eligibility, and what you need to start doing is optimizing your taxes, looking into your value growth, all while sustaining a very effective cash flow, which ultimately lets your tenant pay the rate to the bank for you. If you have any questions regarding the process or the numbers, make sure to paste your comments into the YouTube video and I'll be quick to answer. And if you need a question answered in more depth, I recommend clicking the link in our bio, scheduling a free and non-binding consultation in which we're going to spend 30 minutes going over every single question you have, because I have the black and white proof.